Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots. I'm a useful idiot, and today I want to talk about charities again. And I did a video a little while back about how a lot of charities were kind of a ripoff, particularly because the amount of money that's given to these charities, generally only pennies on the dollar, ends up in the hands of those where it's supposed to go to. But as it turns out, it gets even more interesting than that, because an article came out in the New York Times recently, and it talks about Crony Philanthropism, and basically how charities are in collusion with government. So anyway, it's a great story, because it turns out the IRS approves 99.5% of all charitable applications. So people who apply to create new charities, there's 99% approval rating, and get this, there's 50,000 new charities created each year. So that tells you that it's a game system. And even with the best intentions, you cannot really trust them. In fact, a good example is one cited in the article, and it talked about, consider the Association for Firefighters and Paramedics, a charity ostensibly dedicated to helping burn victims. As Mr. Stern writes, in its most recent filings, the organization acknowledged that of the $2.6 million it raised, a miserly $82,000, or about 3%, went to actual program expenditures. And in 2010, California sued the organization for false and misleading fundraising practices, but because the lines between illegal fraud and lawful inefficiency are so blurry, Mr. Stern notes, the state had to settle for a modest fine. So you got to love that. The lines between illegal fraud and lawful inefficiency are blurry. And I think that's something that I want to hang on to, because that can apply to just about anything, including government, where you never know if it's illegal fraud or just lawful inefficiency. But back to charity. So there's little oversight once established, because it's nearly impossible to shut these down. There just isn't enough oversight. And what a surprise if there's 50,000 new charities created each new year. And of course the donors have a lot to be blamed for, because donors only encourage this market. As it turns out, 65% do no research at all. 65%. I'm sure nobody's surprised by that. I don't want to entirely blame them, because if you have something called the Association for Firefighters and Paramedics, it sounds really good. So you want to donate to them to help burn victims. But if you find out how effective the organization is, it's another story. So 65% people do no research at all. 35% only do a little effort. So that's pretty much everybody. That's 100%. So anyway, and then there's another example of a charity that everybody's familiar with, particularly people from my generation, and that the article goes on to say, readers of a certain age will remember tedious elementary school experiences with drug abuse resistance education, or DARE. And this program was founded in 1983, was at its height in the 90s, and used in 75% of U.S. school districts and in 54 countries around the world. So that program made a lot of money for a lot of years. There's just one problem. DARE didn't work. Long-term studies have shown overwhelmingly that the problem produced no meaningful reduction in drug use, and in some cases actually made kids more likely to use drugs. And yet that same organization, DARE, nonprofit, survives, having consumed an estimated $10 billion, $10 to $15 billion in donor and taxpayer funds over the past decade. So even in spite of these sort of indictments, these charities live on, and people continue to give them money. And but this brings up another part of the problem, and that's the fact that how much do these organizations really address the problems they say they address? When you look at an example like the ones I pointed out, all that money has gone for naught other than make more bureaucrats wealthy. And I don't want take away from good charities and charities that do good work, and they are out there. And there's research sites that you can go to and find out what charities are worthwhile and which are not. But I just most of the people that I'm talking to are certainly sobbing about these issues, but I wish more people were paying attention to this crony philanthropism and also looking at the effectiveness. Another good example of that is that they don't necessarily have to be fraudulent. There's fashionable water charities that boast about drilling wells in Africa, but then don't maintain them in the long run. So once again, the problem is not addressed. We have another well that becomes a cesspool for disease. And so anyway, many charities fail to have much impact on the social issues they supposedly address. And that's another thing to consider. So it's probably prudent to say that a lot of people who are interested in charity should find other avenues oftentimes to address the particular issues they're interested in. And just as I talked about in my last video, the sector is plagued by corruption and fraud, and it's tax exempt, but the way they are run differs little from for-profit enterprises. So anyway, that's an expose recently about charities, and a good follow-up to the video I did before on charities. But I saved the best for last because this is an interesting fact that should interest liberals and conservatives and independents alike, and that is the idea that conservatives' belief in charity as an alternative to the welfare state has a great deal of merit, but it also rests on two premises. The first is that private charity is truly distinct from government, but as Mr. Stern makes clear, the charitable sector is thoroughly fused with government. Many charities exist simply as government subcontractors. Indeed, it was Lyndon Johnson's war and poverty programs that led to the explosive growth of the non-profit sector in the 60s and 70s. Today, most estimates put direct charitable resources from government at around $500 billion a year. Hardly an alternative to the welfare state, America's charities are some of the biggest clients and can be expected to resist reform accordingly. Conservatives also assume that America's nonprofit universe is more nimble, accountable, and efficient than government. But as new documentation shows, this is just wishful thinking. So there's a follow-up on my video on charities, and more exposure that a great deal of it is a racket, regardless of the good intentions. And 50,000 new ones a year are approved, and we now have Crony Philanthropism. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too. And don't be a useful idiot for some fraudulent charity. I'm a useful idiot. Oh, yeah, that's right. We already went through that.